Number 1. Warmth. I live and work in the city. In fact, I live and work in the same building. I own a very small bookstore with a small apartment overhead. I don't make a whole lot of money with it, especially since I can't sell like the big bookstores do or Amazon does. However, fortunately, I don't really need to, since I own the actual building. I make enough to get by, and I am very happy with what I have. The only bad thing that ever happened at my store happened about 20 years ago. We were having an extremely tough winter. It was the kind of cold outside that the moment you go outside, you feel your nose hairs freeze. To top it off, the snow was falling over and over in record inches. I was running the heaters pretty heavily, and it was cozy in my apartment and bookstore. Hell, nothing makes me as happy to this day as wrapping myself up in a big and warm blanket, having a nice hot cup of tea, and reading a book in a dim room. The night that this story happened, we were getting a blizzard. I rarely close the store up early, but I didn't have much of a choice this time. It was already 4 in the evening, and I hadn't had a customer since noon. The snow had already begun falling on the very snowy ground, and it looked like no one was going to be coming. So I went, and I turned the open sign around to closed, and then locked up the store. I spent a few moments looking out the front door at the snow before turning around and beginning to clean the store up. It was getting dark outside when I heard a knock on the front door. I called out that we were closed, but I just heard the knock again. I figured that if someone was really that adamant about getting a book, the least I could do was let them in to get it. I walked up to the door and saw a homeless man standing by the door. Rather than open the door up, I asked the man if I could help him. He only responded by saying, "Warmth." I don't want anyone to think that I am cold here. I live in a huge city, and there are thousands of homeless people in our city. I couldn't let one in my store and my home. I told him that there was a shelter not far away, and it was smart of him to make his way there before it got too late. He moved away from the door, and then I went back to doing my work. Once I was done with cleaning up the store, the sun had completely set. It was dark outside. I went up to my apartment and began setting things up for my reading. It was then that I heard a knock again. I intended to ignore it, as I often would, and eventually the person would go away. But the person kept knocking. So I went downstairs and saw that the very same homeless guy was standing outside my door. I told him I couldn't do anything to help him, and he just said again, "Warmth." I felt awful. I really did, but I couldn't do much for him. I decided to go and grab a blanket for the man. When I did and came back, he was gone. But since he had already been by my place twice, I went ahead, opened the door, and put the blanket outside by the door. I also had a few hand warmers, those gel packs that had the little piece of metal in them, and when you bent the metal, the pack would warm up. I put 2 of those out with the blanket. I then went back to reading my book. A couple hours passed, I sat by the window reading my book. Occasionally, I would look out the window at the street lamp outside and see how thick and fast the snow was falling. It was nasty. Eventually, I heard a knock on the door yet again. I wasn't able to check out the window, but I knew it was the homeless guy again. This time, I just decided I was gonna let him knock until he was tired. I did everything for him that I could have done. He did stop knocking at some point. I also dozed off in my chair. I was woken up hours later by sirens. I assumed they were going by, but they didn't. There were flashing lights outside of my apartment window. Looking out, I saw the fire engine and an ambulance out right in front of my store, and there was something burning out there. I ran down to my shop and meant to run out the door. I stopped, however, when I realized that the fire was right at my door. My immediate thought was that the homeless man, eager for warmth, had set my store on fire. He hadn't. In fact, in order to keep warm, or for whatever reason, he had set himself on fire. He was dead before the fire department got anywhere near him. Number 2. A walk. I can remember the worst day of my life pretty easily. I was 17 years old, and although I was still in school, I really wanted to get a job. I had found out that my parents were going to be making a lot less money, and it would be a struggle for them to send me to college. They were adamant that I would be going to college on time, however, which meant they were planning on making sacrifices for me. I decided to try and make things easier on them by getting a part-time job during the winter and keeping it until I went off to college. That would be a full 9 months of pay that I would be able to keep them from having to pay. I wanted this to be a surprise, so I went job hunting on my own. I didn't have a car, so I would have to hoof it. I waited in the morning for them to go to work, and then I set out down the road. It was a couple miles to the shopping area, which I had walked a few times before. However, with heavy snowfall on the ground that was, in turn, frozen solid, it was much more difficult to get where I was going. By the time I made it there, I was really tired. I still put in applications and was rather upset that I didn't get any immediate interviews. And by the time I was done and prepared to walk back home, it had begun snowing again. To top it off, it was dark outside as well. Unfortunately, my time management skills are no better now than they were then. On the way home from the shopping area, I decided to take some back roads. My other mistake. Those roads weren't very well lighted, and I wasn't really familiar with them. It's just that I recognized the name of one of the roads and automatically assumed that I would be able to find my way. The road I was on, though, was like a rural road. There were no houses on it, and there were no sidewalks. When there were no cars driving by, I could walk on the road. But whenever I saw one coming, I had to step off onto the frozen snow to avoid getting hit. This worked well until, while I was walking, a big SUV came speeding down the road. It happened really fast, and I had to quickly jump to the side. The snow I jumped on was not as solidly frozen as it was in other areas, and then I sank into the snow. Snow then got into my boots, and I already felt it beginning to melt, making my frozen feet wet as well. Angrily, I began yelling expletives at the SUV very loudly, and it stopped. It was about 50 meters in front of me, and it stopped on the road. It didn't back up. No one got out at first. It just stopped, and it remained stopped. I wasn't sure what to do. I immediately wished that I had kept my big mouth shut, but it was too late to take it back. It was also too late for me to turn around and walk the other way. I had to be over halfway down the road, but I also didn't want to walk past the SUV with an angry and possibly violent person in it waiting for me. Although I felt like an idiot doing it, all I could do was stand there like an idiot. I don't really know how long I did stand there. I kept waiting for another car to drive by, but of course, now that I wanted one, it wasn't going to happen. And the car just sat there, obviously in park. All I could figure is that whoever it was must have been waiting for me to walk by. I had the balls to yell at them, which anyone in my place would have likely done, but obviously not to walk by them. I finally called out that I was sorry. Hopefully, apologizing would get the car to move on, but it didn't. Instead, I watched as the door opened to the car. A man got out, and he walked to the back of his car. Standing in the light, I saw how large he was, but even scarier than how large he was carrying his tire iron in his hand, and although he wasn't coming very fast, he was walking towards me. It was then that I made the biggest mistake of my life. I tried running off in the opposite direction. I slipped on the ice, fell, and hit my chin on the ground. I finally knew what people meant when they claimed they were seeing stars. I saw them all over. I turned to see if the man was any closer, and yelped when he was right above me. He stood there, holding the tire iron above me, and I pleaded with him not to hurt me. I saw him shaking his head. Then he kicked me right in the balls, followed by hitting me right in the head with a tire iron. Right then, I knew I was about to die. When I came to, someone was helping me to my feet. It wasn't the same guy. It was a teenager like me. He was talking to me, but I couldn't understand the words. All I knew is that he seemed like he was trying to help me. He put me in the back seat of his car and drove me to the hospital. Apparently, he had been driving down the road and saw the guy in the SUV dragging me along. He got out of his car and took a rifle out of the back and shot a warning shot at the man who attacked me. The man dropped me on the ground and took off. The SUV had been too far ahead for my rescuer to get the plate number, but both of us were able to get a description, and the man was eventually arrested, convicted of aggravated assault, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. I had a concussion and bit deeply into my tongue, almost severing it. But I recovered, thank God, and still got to college on time. Number 3. The following. I had a really hard day. I live alone and work from home. But even working from home doesn't keep me from getting really stressed out. In fact, I think that it might get me more stressed out because I can't go home from work. Even when I am done doing what stressed me out, I'm still in my workplace. The snow had been falling for a few hours already, and I didn't have a car, but I really wanted a drink. I didn't have a drop in the house. After going back and forth in my head over and over again, I decided to get bundled and headed out in the snow. The liquor store wasn't really a long walk away, but I knew it would seem longer because of the significant snowfall on the ground. I trudged out through the snow. It wasn't difficult. Like I expected, the snowfall shut the town down, and there weren't many people or cars out. It was dark. Whenever I passed a street light, I could see the snowfall more distinctly through the light shining through it. It was falling hard, and there was every indication that it was only beginning. Fortunately, I would have some brandy to get me through it all. I made it to the liquor store, covered in snow. There was a guy in there, and he appeared to be having an argument with the liquor store owner. I tried my best to ignore it, and went to the brandy aisle. I did, however, hear bits and pieces of what was going on, as I tried to pick out exactly what I wanted. By the time the guy left, I found out that he knew the owner of the store, and was trying to get him to give him some alcohol on credit, and that the owner, of course, was not willing to do this. I still waited for the guy, who looked like he hadn't bathed or washed his clothes in a month, to leave, before I made my way to the counter. I paid for my brandy and then I went home. Outside the store, the man was standing by the street lamp. When he saw me come out of the store, he came up to me. I groaned, assuming correctly that he was going to begin asking me for money. I told him I only had credit cards, which was my polite way of letting him know I wasn't going to give him any money. He then asked me if I could buy him something. I told him I really couldn't, and that I'd been trying to be polite, but that I just couldn't afford it. And yeah, I could afford it, but that was beside the point. I wasn't going out to buy some strange wino alcohol. I was able to get away from the guy finally and began walking home. However, as I got up to the intersection to turn and walk down the other street, I caught sight of him. He was walking up on the sidewalk that I had been on in my direction. He was a bit behind me, though. I turned and trudged my way on in the snow. I looked back a few times, and eventually I saw him turn, so he was following me. I was still on a main street, not yet in my neighborhood. It sucked that it was snowing so hard, and that there was so much snow on the ground too. I had to trudge through it all. My shoes were completely soaked by this point. I made it to the entrance to my neighborhood and turned in there. When I did, I made it only so far until I forced myself to turn and look back. I saw someone walking a ways behind me on the street. I assumed that it had to be the same guy. Things filled my mind like he was going to try and mug me, steal my credit cards, and get something to drink, or even just steal the brandy I was carrying home. I wasn't worried about it too much, though. He was having just as much difficulty walking through the snow as I was, and I had a huge lead on him. When I made it back to my house, I quickly went inside and locked the door. I turned on my porch light, thinking this would keep him away. I kept a lookout on my front door and didn't see him. After a while, I decided that he must not have been following me after all. I went into my bedroom, which was in the back of the house, and turned on the light. I was getting ready for a much-needed shower before enjoying my brandy. I set up things in my bathroom and walked back into my bedroom. I turned off my bedroom light and immediately fell over backward when I saw the man looking in through my back window. Scared, I ran into the kitchen and grabbed a knife. And then I ran back into my bedroom and he was gone. But I couldn't take a shower then. I was worried he would break in. I had to keep watch on all sides of my house for quite a while before I was finally comfortable again. When I was convinced he had given up, I took my shower, had my brandy, enjoyed some television, and went to bed. In the morning, I had all but forgotten about my nightmarish evening. I knew I'd have to shovel some snow, so I got bundled up. When I went on my front porch, I found my shovel broken, my snow boots gone, and scrawled on the front door, "I knew you'd have some money. I'll see you at the liquor store." Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. I know it's been a bit of a lean month so far, but I've been working on editing lots of stories. Within the next day or two, I hope to have my latest collaboration with Mortis Media out. This will be 20 paranormal stories, 10 on his channel and 10 on my channel. I hope to finally have The Hitchhiker play out, a single compilation of stories, and eventually a Christmas collaboration with Mortis Media and Being Scared. If you'd like to read print versions of these stories, please check out the Killer Orange Cat subreddit in the link provided. You can also take a look around at the Killer Orange Cat merchandise store. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please consider hitting the subscribe button below, or using the icon of Ichigo that will appear at the end of this closing. Feel free to leave me a comment to let me know what you think of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. You can always follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter using the links in the description. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please either send it to the address provided in the description or submit it on the Killer Orange Cat subreddit. My main requirement is that the story is original, meaning it has not yet been read on any other YouTube channel. I hope you're having a great holiday season, and please don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.